Hey everyone, welcome to Singularity Computers Guides, episode 2. Today I'm going to take you through how I pack up my systems for shipping. How to pack up a high-end water-cooled system and safely ship it across the globe. This is something I've had a lot of questions about, and the question I get the most is, do I ship my systems with the loops full? Well, the answer is yes, I always have. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years now, shipping systems around the world, and I've never lost one in shipping. And I've never even had the slightest amount of damage using the techniques that I'm about to show you. So let's get straight into it. I have actually covered this in an old video, but I've never really been through the entire process, and I thought I'd dedicate a video to it. So first of all, it is good to have the original case box, but it certainly doesn't matter if you don't have it. You know, it might be a flat packed case labs case or something. Microfiber cloths, and it's good to have nice big ones, soft, high quality. You are going to be wrapping up all of your internal components with these. Also some bubble wrap, and you can pick up most of these things from a local hardware store. Foam, I use 50mm foam. You're also going to need some plywood. Now I like to use 9mm thick ply, but for ITX builds and small builds, you can get down to 7mm or even 5mm thick ply, and it is usually enough. When you're measuring out your ply, you need to measure up the size of your case to figure out exactly how much you are going to need. You need some screws. About the thickness of the ply is the length that you want. The ones that I have are a bit too long. Some hinges, depending on the size of the case, you might need a couple or 4. It's really up to you, it depends on the size of the hinges. And a latch is really good to have as well. I'll show you how I set all of this up soon. And you're going to need some aluminium angle. And you can see the thickness here, it's about 1.5mm thick and about 30mm each way from the 90-degree angle. And it works very well. Now, the tools you're going to need: a sharp pair of scissors for cutting the foam, a jigsaw with a coarse wood blade, and also a drill. And you're going to need, well, I use a ballpoint pen for marking out my measurements. It works great on the ply. And a 1-meter ruler. What we're going to start with here is really the biggest secret to the success of my packaging. It's something that is common sense, it's very simple, something I've been doing since the beginning, but unless you do this, I mean, you can make the best packaging in the world, put all of the time and effort into it. Unless you reinforce the internal components, you are still going to have problems. So it's more just common sense than anything. Take a look at where the weaknesses are. Now, in any build, but particularly water-cooled systems, the biggest weakness is by far the graphics cards. Because the only thing really holding them in position, you know, by the time you get all the way out to here, the amount of leverage on the slots on the motherboard is very high, and those slots are not very strong. They can easily be ripped off the motherboard. And so this is our biggest weakness. This is what we need to work on the most. But depending on the build, you could have other major weaknesses as well. For example, something you need to watch out for with removable motherboard trays is that they jump out of the rails, and so you need to reinforce them. Just take a look at the entire build. Take a look at the weaknesses. I mean, we're not going to have any problems with the radiators. They are bolted on, you know, each one with 12 M4 bolts. We're not going to have any problems here because we have SingularityComputers ethereal billet alloy reservoir mounts, so none of this is going to go anywhere. We're fine for the power supply, the hard drive. Everything else is really good in this build. It's a very easy build to do the packaging for. But something else I do is I always reinforce the lengths of tube. And so think about if this system is dropped, it's most likely to be dropped on one of the 6 sides. I mean, it could be dropped on a corner, but just think about the effect that that kind of force is going to have from each angle. So if it's dropped on the base, well, this length of tube here, the shock could push it down and pull it out. If it's dropped on the back, you know, this length of tube here could be pulled out. Highly unlikely. I mean, the hardline compression fittings hold them well, and also because of the lengths the way I do my bends and the length of the tube that I get, I design it so that there's heaps of force pushing into the fittings. But these are all things that need to be considered, and this is the most important part of your packaging. You need to strategize, sit down, have a really good think about it, because if there's going to be problems, it's going to be with your reinforcing. So this is where the foam comes in. So the first area I'm going to reinforce is underneath the graphics cards. So just measure it, mark it however you want to, by 170. Doesn't have to be perfect. You need a nice big sharp pair of scissors, preferably bigger than these ones. Something you need to watch out for with foam is that it crumbles, and you don't want all of these little pieces coming off and going everywhere inside of the build. I don't want the customer to have a big cleanup job on their hands on the other end, and some foam actually crumbles so finely that it's almost dust that comes off it. And so that is partially where the microfiber cloths come in. Also, foam can be a bit abrasive. I don't want it rubbing up against the components, in particular the acrylic, which is the most sensitive component in pretty much any build for scratches, even more sensitive than a high gloss paint job. And so the microfiber cloths are designed for cleaning acrylic and for cleaning high gloss paint jobs. They're very fine and very sensitive, so they're perfect to have up against your components. And then you can start fitting the pieces into the build, and doing this you need to be very careful because you don't want to push any components out of position. And this is also why you need to select a foam that is quite soft, so that you can squash it down to get it into position. And I'm not going to push it all the way back against the motherboard because I can get enough pressure up underneath these graphics cards just on this fitting here. So something that's very important is, now that I've put upwards pressure on the graphics cards, I need to match that pressure from the other direction, because we don't want to be pushing the components one way or the other. We're trying to fix them and hold them in position. So on this one, I'm going all the way across from here all the way to the reservoir. You know, it'll also help hold the reservoir in position, not that it needs it, but I've used a whole microfiber cloth to create a bit more bulk. And so this is going to be ideal because it's going to hold the memory in its slots, which is not something that's needed. I mean, the memory is so light that, you know, even if the system was dropped on the Windows side here, the memory's not going to pull out because it's too light. Whereas the graphics cards are heavy enough to rip out of those slots if it's dropped on this side. But now we have that downwards pressure on the memory, we have upwards pressure on this tube here, which is definitely something I wanted to do, and we have the equal downwards pressure on the graphics cards. I'm now going to work on this length of tube here. Sometimes you can actually just use microfiber cloths on their own. If, for example, just here there's not enough space for foam, what I will do is jam in a microfiber cloth. So I just need to finish off in this area here. I want to have something completely surrounding the memory from both sides. So what I'm going to do, because I put a little bit of pressure between this tube here and this memory module, I'm going to put something in between here, and then I'll also from around the back put a length of foam across. So this piece now, I'm going to put a little bit of it in between the memory. So there's only really a couple of things left to do on this side. One of them is this length of tube. I'm going to reinforce it from 3 directions, back that way, down, and also from moving out this way. So I'm going to start by jamming some foam in there. So you can see that I've added a few more microfiber cloths. These are not so much for structural support, although they are a bit, because I have jammed them in here and there, you know, wherever I can to give the most support possible. They're more just to fill in the entire space, which I always like to do for a few different reasons. Number one, if something gets loose and rattles around, it's going to prevent that. That can do a lot of damage. Also, if there was a coolant leak, obviously all of this is going to soak it up nicely. But the only way that could actually happen with everything that I do for my packaging, the structure of the case would have to be changed. So it would have to be crushed or dropped from a big height. We are now going to do the most important part of, in my opinion, all of the packaging. As I've mentioned, the graphics cards are the weakest point. Shock up or down is bad enough. But, then you're still relying on the shear strength of the slots on the motherboard, which is going to be pretty good. Pulling out this way, if the system is dropped on the windowed side panel on its face, that would be the worst of all. Because in my opinion, that is the weakest point in the whole system, because the graphics cards are very heavy in a water-cooled system, ripping the slots off the board. So what we need to do is reinforce back that way, put some good pressure back onto the motherboard, and the only way that we can do that is by jamming something in as we are putting on the side panel. So this is going to put some outward pressure on the side panel, which is not so bad, but it is only temporarily anyway, because as soon as we do the rest of the packaging, it's going to surround the entire build and support it from all angles. So not an epic amount of pressure, just firm pressure. Doesn't have to be exact. So this can be a little bit difficult, take a bit of fiddling. So that's perfect positioning there, and it's really perfect amount of pressure too. This sort of side panel can be a real nightmare to do this with, but it probably looks like I'm putting a lot more pressure than I actually am. You need to put a fair bit because the foam will actually squash down eventually, and over time there will be less and less support. The gloves I'm wearing are actually painter's gloves. I would be wearing material gloves, but my material gloves have worn out from tightening fittings. So you can see, a little bit difficult, but it's definitely a part of the build that needs really, really good support. So not much to do around this side. In a dual compartment case, you're obviously going to have pretty much twice the amount of work on your hands, but all I need to do back here is, as I mentioned, I need to still put pressure back on the memory, and also the tube running back to the top of the res, I need to put some pressure back that way. So now that all of the internal components are reinforced and I have both of the side panels on, the next step is an optional step, and I only usually do this if I have a custom paint job. So I've painted this side panel. It's an extremely high gloss finish. It's going to be sensitive to scuffing and scratches. So if I just start wrapping this in bubble wrap now, it could end up scuffing the paint job, and it will certainly scuff the acrylic window. So I'd say at least cover your acrylic window, but if you have an extremely high gloss paint job that you want to protect, cover the entire thing with microfiber cloths. So I'm just using 3M painter's tape to tape the microfiber cloths on. Now that I've wrapped the entire case in microfiber cloths, the next step is to start wrapping it in bubble wrap. Now you need to get everything surrounding the case, the microfiber cloths and the bubble wrap, as even as possible so that you end up with even pressure on the case. So, not too much overlap with the microfiber cloths, don't scrunch them up or anything like that. And with the bubble wrap, make sure that it's the exact height, not short, not any overhang, otherwise you're just going to end up with uneven pressure everywhere. And what we're going to do, because I'm using the original case box for this one, I'm not going to use the styrofoam packaging though. So we have a good gap all the way around the outside of the case, and I'm going to fill that entire gap with bubble wrap. So I'm going to continue wrapping this until it fits tightly into this box. So I've done the top, I now need to tip the system upside down and do the bottom, but before I do that, it's very easy to lose track of which is the top and which is the bottom. And so I have some this way up stickers, but you can just put an arrow or whatever you want. This is also for the customer, when the customer is unpacking on the other end. So now that the system is completely padded, we can easily handle it even on this hard floor. Now something that you should have done is check your reservoir for leaks when the system is upside down, because you might not have your cap screwed on tightly enough, you might not have put in the O-ring, one of the plug fittings might leak, who knows? Something at the top of your res might actually leak when the system is upside down, so make sure you check that. So the system is still upside down, and this is the best way to put it in the box. From above. That way you don't have to lift it, it's just a lot easier. And that's it, the original box will act as some extra protection for the next step that we are about to take. The next step is to build a box from the ply, and the way I build it, it's reusable many times, thick ply, aluminium cornering, so it's very strong, it has hinges and a lockable latch. There are two different ways I do this. If I have the original case box like I do for this build, I build the ply box to fit the original case box exactly inside of it. But if I don't have the original case box, I will line the inside of the ply box with foam. And I usually use the 50mm foam that I used to reinforce the components inside of the case. So I've measured everything out. Make sure when you're measuring out to take into consideration the thickness of the ply and which parts of the ply are going to go inside of each other. So I've cut the aluminium cornering, and this is obviously what is going to hold the ply box together. So this needs to be on all of the edges, except around the top, because around the top we obviously have a lid. I've completed the box, and you can see that it's just a simple common sense design with the inclusion of these nice big strong hinges and also the lockable latch. It makes it reusable, so the system can be shipped back to me for upgrades in the future, go to lands, whatever. So it's a good reusable box, very strong. I mean, this thing could be almost run over by a car and survive because of the aluminium cornering, and you can beef it up even more if you want to. Sometimes I use 2mm aluminium cornering, which is really heavy and strong, but it's on all of the edges except of course around the lid, and so it makes it very strong. You can see it's all the way around the base, and the corners are what is going to get damaged during shipping. I mean, if the box is dropped on the corner, it's a huge amount of weight on one little area, it's just going to collapse. So the aluminium really helps with that. The problem that we're still left with is jarring. Now, we have the internals reinforced, so that helps to solve that problem. That's the biggest thing, as I've mentioned. But we have bubble wrap around the build, which is also going to help with that. But this box is very hard, and if I just put the system into this box and leave it at that, the jarring, if the box is dropped, is going to be quite extreme. Not only that, when custom sees boxes like this, they really don't like it. They just have a real thing about it. I don't know what their problem is, but if they see anything that's a nicely made box with a lock on it, they usually tear it to bits. So to get around that, and I've actually never had that happen to one of my builds, I wrap everything up in tape and make it look like something that's not so expensive. So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, I'm now going to put the build into the box, and for this I need to first of all tip it upside down. So it's a tight fit, which is good. That's exactly what we wanted. And there it is. A little bit of a gap at the top, small gap on either side. It's perfect. So I'm about to close up the box for the final time. Now there was a little bit of a gap down the side, so I've dropped some bubble wrap down there to close that up. And also the gap in the top, I've put some bubble wrap in there to close that up as well. Now, sometimes what I do with smaller, lighter builds is I leave an extra 100 mil or so in the top to put the motherboard box with all of the accessories, extra fittings for filling and draining, extra coolant and all of that. But with this one, I'm going to send all of that separately in the motherboard box. So let's seal this up for the final time. So that's fairly tight in there. You know, it's not tight enough where I have to put heaps of weight on it, but it's firm. Now don't use any fancy locks or anything. What I said about customs, I've heard horror stories where somebody made a beautiful cabinet for an amazing system and they locked it all up with really nice locks. I mean, seriously, the flight box was worth a fortune, but if it's locked, it just seems to egg on customs for some reason, because they actually completely destroyed the cabinet and completely destroyed the build. So, and I don't even know who footed the bill. I certainly don't think they did. Usually what they do is they destroy it and then charge you for having to open the box or something. So watch out for that. I always cover the entire base with tape. I don't leave any bubble wrap exposed, because otherwise the bubble wrap tears and then water can get in and, you know, it's just not good. So I suggest sealing up the entire base with tape, and it'll toughen it up so that, you know, even if it's slid around on a rough, sharp surface, it'll hold up. It also helps it to slide better on a lot of surfaces. So there it is, all wrapped up and ready to go. I've added another 50 millimeters of bubble wrap around the outside, so including the bubble wrap on the inside of the original case box, that is 100 millimeters of bubble wrap, plenty to, you know, soften any jarring or hard blows. With this packaging method, as I mentioned, I've never had a system damaged, and you can see what I mean now that the flight box has been wrapped up. I mean, it just looks like it's a normal cardboard box. It won't draw any attention at all. And that is the way that we want things. I mean, obviously you can see from the shipping invoice the value, but still, there's just something about boxes and locking them up that just really does draw a lot of unwanted attention. Something else you're going to need is some good insurance. I never use the shipping company's insurance. I have my own high-end insurance. Another very important thing, but I've never had to use it, which is great. So I hope this information was useful. Remember that none of this would be possible without our patrons. Thanks for watching.